In the year 204 BCE, on a hot, sweltering day, a flat barge slowly made its way up the Tiber River toward Rome. A crowd gathered on the riverbank, anxiously awaiting the boat's cargo. Rome was in the throes of the Second Punic War. Hannibal had been laying siege to Rome for over a decade, blocking food supplies and trying to incite Italian cities to rebel, and the citizens of Rome feared that they were about to be defeated. The crowd waiting on the banks of the Tiber River included Claudia Quinta, a well-known matriarch of the city. Until recently, Claudia had been known as a respectable woman, but in recent weeks, rumors had begun to circulate that she was not chaste, not faithful to her marriage vows. Claudia Quinta waited with Scipio Nausicaa, a well-known patriarch of the city. The two had been selected as city elders to welcome the ship's precious cargo, a meteoric stone that Romans had come to view as the incarnation of Cybele, the great mother goddess. Suddenly, the ship caught on a sandbar, and it wouldn't budge. For a moment, it seemed as if the goddess would not make it to Rome. And then Claudia Quinta began to pray out loud. She prayed to the Great Mother to release the ship. The poet Ovid describes what happened next. A droughty season had the river dried. High were the banks of sand, and low the tide. To drag the ship along, they pull and strain, but all their labor, all their toil is vain. But Claudia Quinta happened to be there, a lady great by birth as well as fair, and truly chaste, though false yet common fame had long deprived her of her better name. Then to the sacred image turned her head, and falling on her knees this prayer made. If I am guiltless, goddess, deign to show some sign that all my innocence may know. If chaste, let not the ship unmoving stand, but as I draw it, follow my chaste hand. So she said, and gave the ship a gentle hail, when to the great amazement of them all, the ship began along the stream to glide, and took her course as Claudia was her guide. Miraculously, the barge pulled free. Claudia stepped into the waters and began to tow the ship single-handedly to shore. The story spread like wildfire, and Romans came to believe two things. First, the great mother goddess had freely chosen to come to Rome, which suggested that she would save Rome from defeat by Hannibal. Second, she had chosen to do so in a way that publicly established Claudia's virtue. This is one of the most well-developed legends centered on Cybele, a key figure in Roman mythology. Cybele, usually spelled Cybele, and a distinct figure from the Sibylline oracles, has roots that extend back many millennia in human history. In this lecture, we'll examine the great mother goddess mythology. We'll note how it changed over time, adapting to different cultural environments. And we'll look at how Claudia Quinta's connection to the great mother goddess reflected Roman class relations. Part of what makes Cybele intriguing as a Roman mythological figure is that Cybele wasn't actually Roman at all. She came from Asia. Cybele's origins have been traced back to Anatolia, the westernmost portion of Asia, roughly the area in which modern-day Turkey is situated. The oldest known image of a proto-Cybele figure is a baked clay nude female figurine dated to the 6th millennium BCE. The woman appears to be calmly giving birth while seated on a throne, resting her hands on armrests shaped like feline heads. This figure, known as the seated woman of Çatalhöyük, was discovered in 1961, and it's viewed as a classic Neolithic fertility goddess figure. Evidence indicates that the Great Mother continued as an object of worship in Asia Minor throughout the next several centuries. For example, archaeologists have associated a large rock carving found in Asia Minor with ancient mother goddess worship. A gigantic seated female figure is carved into the rock just north of Mount Sipylus in the Aegean region of Turkey. Now, this sculpture, which begins roughly 100 meters up from the ground and then rises 8 to 10 meters high, is dated to the first half of the 6th century BCE. It's inscribed with the phrase, "Mother of the Mountain." Legend has it that this mountain was a favorite place of the ancient mother goddess. We know that this particular rock shrine was still an object of worship for the Magnesians, an ancient Greek community, as late as the 2nd century CE. Flash forward a little bit in time. Around the 6th century BCE, the Greek colonies extended into Western Anatolia. The Greeks absorbed the Anatolian mother goddess into their own mythological tradition. For example, the Greek tradition taught that the colossal rock shrine near Mount Sipylus was created by Proteus the hunter, the ugly son of Tantalus, who was the ruler of Sipylus and a son of Zeus. In another myth, the rock carving was said to be Niobe, Proteus's sister, who turned into stone after her children were murdered by Apollo and Artemis. Whatever the case, the Greeks came to think of this figure as the mother of the gods. From the early 5th century BCE, the mother goddess came to be known by a specific name, Cybele the Mother, as well as Mistress of Animals. In this period, Cybele continued to be associated with mountains and wild animals, especially lions, as well as with fertility. In images, she is almost always accompanied by lions. Sometimes they are standing guard beside her, and sometimes they are pulling her in a chariot. To some extent, Cybele became assimilated with Gaia, the earth goddess in Greek mythology. Some scholars argue that she was also assimilated with Rhea, the mother of Zeus, and with the corn mother goddess Demeter. Cybele was a divisive figure. While many Greeks adopted her worship, others totally rejected her. Herodotus, the Greek historian, claims that Anacharsis, a Scythian, was actually put to death by his own brother for taking on Greek ways, especially worshiping Cybele. Even among the Greeks, a kind of love-hate relationship developed with Cybele. Over time, she became associated with town and city walls as part of her protector function. But this was, in some cases, driven as much by fear as by adoration. For example, the Athenians built a structure dedicated to Cybele's worship, but only because the citizens believed that she had sent a plague upon the city. For the most part, Cybele was seen as a foreign goddess, as indicated by the fact that she carried a hand drum, a common marker of foreign gods. In this period, she is commonly associated with music, wine, and various forms of debauchery. She was also usually linked with the lower classes, or alternatively to initiates who practiced a kind of frenetic worship, possibly linked to mystery cults. The mythology of Cybele had been somewhat unformed prior to her arrival in Greece, but in Greece, Cybele's mythology became fully developed. In Greek mythology, Cybele was linked to Attis, a young male figure with roots in the religion of Phrygia, located in western central Anatolia. In the Phrygian religion, Attis alternately appeared as Cybele's consort, as a priest, or as a related but subordinate deity. In Greek mythology about Cybele and Attis, Attis was Cybele's grandson, but she fell in love with him anyway. She pursued Attis, even when he was promised to be married to another. Eventually, Cybele drove Attis mad, and in a crazy frenzy, he castrated himself. Attis's father-in-law to be castrated himself in sympathy with Attis, and these acts supposedly gave rise to the community of eunuchs who served Cybele at her cultic sites. It was not uncommon for Cybele and Attis to share worship at certain worship sites, although Attis always took a backseat to Cybele. Finally, the Great Mother came to Rome. According to historical records, during the Second Punic War in the late 3rd century BCE, omens from the heavens seemed to indicate that Rome was about to experience catastrophic military defeat. Now, these omens were accompanied by natural disasters. Historical records indicate that there was a dramatic meteor shower, and a damaged harvest led to a severe famine. Desperate for relief, the Roman senators consulted the Sibylline oracle, this time spelled Sibyll, and not to be confused with Cybele, the Great Mother. The oracle declared that Rome could defeat her attackers from Carthage if the city offered worship to the Great Mother Goddess. The historian Livy writes that the Roman priests consulted the oracular books and came across an old promise. If ever foreign foe should carry war into the land of Italy, from Italy he can be driven out and overcome if the Idaean mother shall be brought from Pessinus to Rome. Cybele was the Idaean mother, and Pessinus was a city in Asia Minor, the city from which the mythological king Midas, dated around 738 to 696 BCE, ruled over the ancient kingdom of Phrygia. Based on this oracle, the Roman priests determined that Carthage might be defeated if Rome began to offer worship to the Great Mother of the Phrygian people. The Roman Senate sent ambassadors to obtain permission from the king of Pergamum, since his kingdom controlled the Great Mother cult. According to legend, the goddess came to Rome in the form of a black meteoric stone, although we have no way of knowing where this meteoric stone originated. As described earlier, the Great Mother's arrival on the Tiber River was dramatic. The stories of the Mother Goddess's miraculous arrival bolstered Cybele's status as a goddess, skyrocketing her to popularity, even though she maintained her reputation as a foreign goddess. In addition, according to legend, after the stone was brought to Rome, the famine ended, and soon Rome defeated Hannibal, Carthage's military leader. This sealed Rome's faith in the goddess, who was subsequently hailed as Rome's Great Mother. A great temple was built for her on the Palatine Hill, and an annual festival, the Megalesia, was established in her honor, including annual athletic games. A play was written dramatizing the miracle of the Great Mother's arrival in Rome on the barge. The story of Cybele's dramatic barge ride into Rome was also seen as a validation of the social structure of Rome, particularly the power and the prestige of the prominent families, including leading figures such as Claudia Quinta and Scipio Nasica. Cybele's willingness to be led to shore by Claudia Quinta seemed to suggest that she would cooperate with Rome's leading families, signaling that the Great Mother's power would favor Rome's aristocracy. More broadly, the mythology surrounding the Great Mother Goddess supported the hierarchical social structure of Roman society. Rome's noble families didn't simply dominate the common citizens. The noble families themselves were embroiled in complex and nuanced networks driven by the concept of patronage, in which individuals and families served or were served by one another. This complex system governed social, political, and financial relationships, and the Great Mother Goddess cult reinforced this system. The Great Mother's very arrival in Rome involved supplication and response, a hallmark of patronage. Thus, the Great Mother reinforced existing Roman tradition. And this is another way in which myth can be powerful. In addition to explaining natural phenomena and human relationships, mythology has been used by certain social groups to justify their dominance over other social groups. At the same time, Cybele took on much greater importance in Rome than she had ever had in Greek mythology. She truly became the Great Mother in Rome, an unequivocally positive figure associated with Roman victory and dominance. Several Roman stories developed around Cybele. One Roman writer said that Cybele was exposed as a baby by her father, King Meon of Phrygia. Instead of dying, she survived, and she was raised by leopards and other wild animals. There are some strong parallels with Romulus and Remus here. As children, Cybele and the twins were left to die of exposure, but they survived instead, raised by animals in the wild. This ultimately led to the birth and the survival of Rome. It's as if nature herself conspired to save Cybele, Romulus, and Remus in order to establish Rome. According to Roman mythology, as a young woman, Cybele took Attis as her lover, and her father became furious when she became pregnant with Attis's child. In one Roman version of the story, King Meon executed Attis for sleeping with his daughter, and Cybele roamed the countryside in despair. The gods punished King Meon and the Phrygians by sending a drought so that the crops failed. In response to this, the Phrygian people buried Attis properly. There are variations of this story. According to the Roman poet Catullus, Attis was a Greek young man who sailed to Phrygia out of love for Cybele. In an ecstatic moment, he castrated himself. In another version of the story, Attis falls in love with a naiad, a water nymph, leading him to break his vow of faithfulness to Cybele. When Cybele finds out, she kills the naiad. Overwhelmed with grief, Attis castrates himself. According to Ovid's Metamorphoses, Attis is then transformed into a tree. Now, all of these stories present variations on the theme of castration, probably as a mythological explanation for the eunuch priests who came from Phrygia in service to Cybele. The castration stories may also reflect Rome's view of Phrygian religion as wild or ecstatic. Roman mythology did a makeover on Cybele when the Romans adopted her as a goddess. Over time, the Romans seem to have domesticated her. In Roman images, the lions and the hawks that accompanied her in Asia Minor disappear, and Cybele's sexual relationship with Attis was allegorized. The Roman version of the Great Mother is a sedate, solitary goddess, pious and respectable. Roman historians describe her as the mother goddess of ancient Troy and as an ancestral goddess of the Roman people themselves in the genealogy of Aeneas. Cybele even appears in the great Roman national story, the Aeneid. Virgil presents Cybele there not only as Trojan, but as the mother of Jupiter, king of the gods. Cybele comes to the aid of the Trojans, providing them with a grove of sacred trees to build a fleet of ships, and she convinces Jupiter to make these ships indestructible. These enchanted ships make it possible for Aeneas and his men to escape from Troy, thereby protecting the ancestors of Rome. And ultimately, these ships are magically changed into sea nymphs. Over time, the Romans rewrote their more recent history as well. They began to describe Cybele's initial arrival in Rome actually as a return to Rome, claiming that Rome was her true culture of origin. The Romans portrayed themselves as Cybele's true descendants, exiled from her for millennia, but eventually restored to their rightful relationship with the goddess when she returned in the form of the meteoric stone to her true and ever-loyal people. Simultaneously, all of the images of the Great Mother found scattered throughout Greece and Phrygia were claimed as far-flung property of Rome. Basically, Rome claimed that the Great Mother had gone ahead of her people, reaching out to cultures that were ultimately inferior to Rome, and thus destined to come under Roman rule. Cybele gradually became linked with the imperial order and family. For example, the Empress Livia, who lived between 58 BCE and 29 CE, was characterized as the Great Mother's earthly incarnation. And Roman citizens were expected to show the same level of respect and devotion to Livia that they would show to the goddess herself. The Great Mother was invoked when Rome attempted to wield religious authority over its empire. And eventually, the Great Mother was exported out to the Greek territories that fell under Rome's rule, repackaged as Cybele, Imperial Rome's protector. By this point, Cybele had become completely domesticated. She was no longer linked with mountains. Instead, she was associated with the Roman Empire cities. And instead of being associated with wild spaces, she was associated with Roman agriculture. She truly became a completely domesticated imperial mother goddess. The wild Cybele makes a final, brief, but strategic appearance in Christian anti-pagan writing. The Christians highlighted her lurid behavior with Attis as a foil for discussions of Christian morality. The most vivid accounts include stories of Christian martyrdom. For example, legend has it that in the early 4th century, Roman soldiers gave Saint Theodore of Amasia time to recant his commitment to Christianity. He's said to have spent that time burning down a temple dedicated to Cybele instead. As punishment, he was tortured and then thrown into a furnace and burned alive. Cybele's transformation over the centuries represents a very common dynamic in world mythology. Like many other mythical figures, she has roots that extend back many millennia in human history. But Cybele is a kind of shapeshifter, maintaining her core mother goddess identity, but surviving and traveling by adapting in form and function to new cultural settings. She offers a classic example of how classic mythological figures transform as they travel from culture to culture over many centuries. The key to surviving these travels is a delicate balance between change and continuity. As we've seen, the mother goddess of ancient Anatolia is markedly different from the Roman Great Mother, Cybele. The Anatolian goddess is a wild woman associated with mountains, lions, and birds of prey. The Roman Cybele, by contrast, is sophisticated, urbane, and polished. She has shed all obvious links to the wild. As I like to tell my students, the Anatolian goddess is the girl you party with in college. The Roman Cybele is the woman you introduce to mom and dad. However, there's a clear thread of continuity that connects the Anatolian, Greek, and Roman mother goddesses. All these figures are associated with fertility. This may seem obvious, but it's worth stating explicitly that for all intents and purposes, every mythological tradition known to us includes a goddess of fertility. This fact alone should make us appreciate the near universal value of fertility. At the same time, it suggests that throughout human history, fertility, both agricultural and human, was not taken for granted. In the modern West, we largely haven't had to think about this very often, but we're actually in the minority. Less obviously, the mother goddess is associated with protection. The form and the focus of that protection shifts as we move from wild local mountain regions to vast urbanized empires. However, the mother goddess's protective role suggests that every human culture craves protection from something, whether it be the natural world, human physical frailty, disease and famine, or the threat of war. In fact, the maternal goddess as a figure may date back to well before the seated woman of Çatalhöyük was ever carved. The oldest fertility figure discovered, the Venus of Willendorf, was found in Austria and dates to 24,000 or 22,000 BCE. Now think about this for a minute. That's 25,000 years ago. Now to be fair, this figure isn't seated and she's not accompanied by felines. We don't have any surviving mythology associated with this artifact, but most scholars describe her as a fertility goddess, which seems awfully close to the mother goddess idea. So it's possible that mother goddess mythology dates back 25,000 years ago in human history. And similar mother goddesses have been found in ancient Egypt, in Old Celtic Europe, in Native and Mesoamerican mythologies, in Pacific Island communities, and in South and East Asia. While each goddess has distinct features reflecting her individual cultural origins, certain elements seem virtually universal. Carl Jung included a mother figure among his archetypes, arguing that mother imagery was part of the collective unconscious. He believed that mother figures are associated with maternal care, comfort, and sympathy, and also with magical authority, wisdom, and spiritual exaltation. According to Jung, mother figures represent all that is benign, all that cherishes and sustains, and all that fosters growth and fertility. On the negative side, Jung also associated the mother figure with everything secret, hidden, and dark, with the world of the dead, with anything that devours, seduces, and poisons, and with everything that is terrifying and inescapable, such as fate. Jung may go a little too far in his argument that certain archetypes permeate a collective unconscious. But he does seem to be onto something in noting that almost every culture we know of includes great mother goddesses, and these figures often exhibit a dual nature, nurturing and sympathetic on the one hand, seductive and sometimes terrifying on the other hand. Other scholars have explained the presence of mother goddesses by pointing out that since all human life begins with birth and nurturing from a mother, it's natural for the mother to become a foundational cultural symbol of agricultural fertility, the creation of the material world, and the source of spiritual life. Our conversation about the mother goddess would not be complete without noting her conspicuous absence in certain cultures. Communities dominated by the Abrahamic religious traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, largely lack a powerful female or mother goddess. While noting the importance of strong women such as Sarah, the Virgin Mary, and Fatima, it's clear that these traditions are dominated by male gods. Scholars have offered many different explanations for this, noting in particular that the Abrahamic traditions intentionally suppressed pagan and polytheistic traditions that featured powerful female deities. Recently in the modern West, small groups within these dominant patriarchal traditions have tried to correct this problem. Often they point to feminine qualities and even metaphors used to describe the Abrahamic male god. Other groups are reviving cults focused on mother goddesses that were suppressed or driven underground centuries ago. In other parts of the world, as Christianity spread, mother goddesses, along with other female deities, were absorbed into dominant religious traditions. For example, the Inca worshipped a fertility goddess known as Pachamama, who watched over the harvest. She was also responsible for earthquakes. When the Spanish Catholics conquered the Inca, Pachamama didn't entirely disappear. Instead, she became conflated with the Virgin Mary, never quite disappearing. Native stories about Pachamama were altered a bit and then associated loosely with Mary. And Pachamama is still explicitly linked with the Virgin Mary in parts of Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, and Peru. In many regions of Central and South America, mother fertility goddess worship continues, conflated with European Christianity. In our day, we're seeing a revival of interest in mother goddess mythology. Inspired by feminist thought in the 1970s, many communities have come together to revive appreciation for the so-called pagan traditions that emphasize goddesses, especially mother and female creator goddesses. Scholars such as Carol Christ, Mary Daly, and Starhawk have worked to bring ancient myths about the mother goddess into contemporary conversations about socioeconomic equality and green living. In our next lectures, we leave the Mediterranean behind, moving to European mythology, beginning with the Celtic traditions. On the surface, everything appears to be different. The climate's different, history, politics, and the body of mythology. We turn away from the great military campaigns of Greece and Rome. And it seems for a moment that we are entering an entirely new world. But on second glance, we find the great mother goddess mythology there too. We'll see that Freya, the Norse mother goddess, is associated with love, beauty, fertility, gold, war, and death. And she rides a chariot pulled by two cats. In the Celtic tradition, the mother goddess is Anu, sometimes called Danu. She's often presented as the mother to the Dagda, the great father figure to a special ancient Celtic tribe. In fact, this tribe, the Tuath De Danann, is named for her. Their name means people of the goddess Danu. Danu is associated, predictably, with fertility, and in some traditions she is linked with the land and the waters of Ireland. And finally, like other mother goddesses, she is also associated with protection. As we turn from the ancient Greek and Roman myth traditions to European mythology, we'll see that much of this mythology reflects the specific geography, history, and culture of Europe. But it's interesting to see that the European traditions, like virtually all others, will reference a mother goddess figure. The mother goddess mythology, it seems, is everywhere, perhaps tying human cultures together across time and space with a common mythological thread.